All right, thank you so much, guys, for coming. Today we're going to do lecture 14, Endocrine System 1. I split the information into 2 bits. So the first bit, we're just going to talk overall about the endocrine system, the kind of receptors that are there, and the kind of hormones, because hormones are what the endocrine system uses to pass messages or to instruct different body structures to do functions. Just like the nervous system uses neurotransmitters to influence other cells and other neurons. Okay, so today we'll also compare a little bit the nervous system, since we just done that, and also the endocrine system. So the endocrine system makes the second control system in the body. The first one would be what would be the first control system in the body? I just said it when I was... The nervous system is the major control system, and so this one follows second. All right. The functions of the nervous system and the functions of the endocrine system is to maintain homeostasis. So one of the things about the endocrine system is to control metabolism and tissue maturation. All right. Hormones like adrenal cortical hormones on the adrenal gland, cortisol and corticotropic hormones control metabolism. All right. Cortisol mobilizes glucose, actually, and it is also like a stress hormone. Cortisol is. If you have too much cortisol, in fact, you can measure stress by measuring this hormone. Okay, but in normal situations, it mobilizes glucose. That's why when you're stressed, sometimes you gain weight because of the increased metabolism from the cortisol, because you over-secrete the cortisol. It's kind of like when you're depressed, you eat comfort food, right? So your body kind of looks for nutrients and mobilizes nutrients when you're stressed, and then you release too much cortisol. Same thing. See what I'm saying? It's kind of like the same. What did I do? My God. Sometimes it messes up in the middle of it. Iron regulation. Okay. We're also going to talk about certain receptors that receive hormones and will stimulate an ion channel. Okay. Such as in smooth muscle, there's calmodulin, right? Which is a protein that will attach to calcium for smooth muscles to contract, all right? And it will influence the calcium channel to open, and then the smooth muscle contract. Okay, so that's an example. Water balance, there are hormones that will affect the kidney, all right? Some of them also have to do with the heart. For instance, there's a hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide. Okay, this is released. Water balance has to do with blood, amount of blood you have. The more fluid you have, the more blood you have. All right, and the higher the blood pressure. So if your heart is having, stretching too much because there's a lot of blood coming back to the heart, it will release this atrial natriuretic peptide, which is a hormone that then goes to the kidneys, and it will cause you to release more sodium in urine, so that wherever the sodium goes, the water follows, so that you release dilute urine. So you release more water, and then your blood levels go down. All right. So water balance, is also a function of the endocrine system, right? And immune system regulation, right? And heat and blood pressure regulation. And blood pressure regulation also comes with this. The angiotensin system also regulates blood pressure. The angiotensinogen system, and the ACE, which is angiotensin converting enzyme, that will increase blood pressure by constricting your blood vessels. All right. Or it can decrease blood pressure by relaxing your smooth muscles in your blood vessels. So hormones can do that. They can either contract your blood vessel smooth muscles, or they can relax it to control the blood pressure. All right? All right, so there's a lot of functions of the system. And then, of course, control of blood glucose. And the hormone that does it is insulin. All right, if you eat a meal, you release insulin from the pancreas, and then insulin causes the uptake of glucose by cells, so it can be used up. There's another hormone also that is involved in glucose metabolism, which is glucagon, and glucagon is in the liver. It influences the liver. It's also produced by the pancreas, but it will go to the liver. The liver stores glycogen. So if you haven't eaten a meal and your blood glucose goes down, your body will release glucagon, which will then go to the liver and start to break down the glycogen that is stored there. And then you release glucose into the blood system. All right? So there are many hormones there that have to do with blood glucose levels. And also reproductive functions. What are some of the common hormones we know about? Estrogen for women, estrogen, testosterone for men, and then other hormones for pregnancy, like progesterone. Yeah, oxytocin in the end. All those are hormones that control. Oxytocin controls the contraction of this uterus muscle, all right? And human chorionic gonadotrophin, which is released when a female is pregnant. All those are hormones that are involved in the reproductive function. Uterine contraction, we just mentioned the oxytocin. Okay, and milk release, prolactin. Prolactin causes the mammary glands to produce milk, all right? And and that is released, after pregnancy. So, of course, for each of the systems we do, you gotta be able to tell me functions of that system, right? And there's a lot of functions for the endocrine system, it being the second major control system of the body, right? Okay, so now we're going to talk about the kind of glands that are there in the nervous system and the endocrine system. Okay. So this is the second largest system and controls metabolic activities, like we just saw. Controls metabolic activities. All right. And they are produced by the endocrine glands. All right. Endocrine glands means to secrete within. So the cells will produce that hormone, and the hormone goes into interstitial fluid, right? And then when the hormone goes into interstitial fluid, it will diffuse into blood. And that's how the hormone is, is moved to other parts. So there are many glands in the body that produce these hormones, all right? So some of them are in the head, in the brain, like the pituitary gland, the pineal body, and the hypothalamus. Okay? The hypothalamus controls the pituitary. It controls it in two ways. We'll talk more about it in endocrine system too. It can send neural impulses to the pituitary, all right, to cause it to release some hormones. Okay? Things like growth hormone releasing hormone comes from the hypothalamus and will act on the pituitary to release growth hormone, okay? Or it can send an impulse to the anterior and posterior, and then the impulse will cause the pituitary to release glands, okay? So, other glands in the endocrine system include the pancreas we just talked about, the one that produces insulin and glucagon, all right? The thyroid, that produces a lot of thyroid hormones, all right? All of these thyroid hormones are, fat soluble, and we'll talk about those in endocrine system too. All right. The thymus as well. The thymus releases hormones like thymosin and thymopoietin, which is how the endocrine system is involved in immune system. Because thymopoietin and thymosin will cause maturation of T cells, right? So that's how the immune system comes in here with the endocrine. And then, of course, the hypothalamus, we talked about it. It will control the anterior and the posterior pituitary via neural functions by sending nervous impulses. The pituitary is kind of like this. Okay, so the posterior pituitary is kind of controlled by the neural functions going here, all right, and then it's connected by the infundibulum from the hypothalamus, all right. This is what lies. Remember the bone? Example, what you call this? The cellar testicle. That little indentation in the skull. That's where the pituitary gland lies in there. Okay, and the hypothalamus is just above it, and then the thalamus is above it. All right. So it controls it by impulses or by releasing hormones such as thyroid stimulating hormone, releasing hormone, which causes the thyroid gland to release thyroid stimulating hormone. All right. So that's the hypothalamus there, and it controls all the things like hunger, pleasure, and all those things are controlled by the hypothalamus. All right. So it will generate eating behavior if you have low blood glucose and so forth, and then it will release those hormones. Okay, so other tissues and organs as well that will control, like fats that release hormones. The fat cells, adipocytes, release some hormones. Okay, that are also involved in metabolism and mobilizing body nutrients as well. All right, and you know, the small intestine as well releases hormones like cholecystokinin, okay, and secretin that are involved in digestive functions. All right, and the kidneys will release erythropoietin, which is one of the hormones that is involved in creating more blood cells, red blood cells. Okay. So, and also the angiotensin converting enzyme that controls the blood pressure. The kidney is involved as well because the kidney filters the blood fluids, the body fluids, and it influences how much fluids you have in your body and how much blood you have in your body. Therefore, the amount of blood you have determines the pressure, the blood pressure. So the kidney can release more ions in urine and water follows it. Or if you are not drinking water and you're thirsty, it will retain more ions and then more water is absorbed. So you release very concentrated urine but very small volumes and you retain more water. Okay? So all that is regulated by the kidney. All right? All right, so there are many. So just to give you an overview of the endocrine system glands, we talked about the three in the head, which are the hypothalamus, right? The pituitary. Sometimes in the exam I'll say, okay, can you tell me some hormones that are located in the head? And then tell me some hormones that are located elsewhere in the body. Okay? This is only three, all right, in the pineal body that are located in the head of these endocrine glands. Okay? In ANP2, when we do dissection of the brain, you'll be able to see all this when we do dissection of the brain. All right? And then, of course, this is the thyroid. All right? And the thyroid is a certain shape, and we'll talk more about it in ANP2. It's got this bilobed appearance with like a pyramid in the middle. Okay? And then, of course, the thymus, one that is involved in immune function, one that produces thymosin, thymopoietin, and actually this is much bigger in kids because kids haven't been exposed to microorganisms and they're still naive. And then as you get older and become more immune to more diseases, the thymus gets smaller and smaller. Okay, in an adult, and it starts to get replaced with fat and so forth. And so, anybody know what this organ is? The pancreas, yes. What about this right here? On top of this bean-shaped organ. I know you know the bean-shaped organ, but what's the one on the top? The adrenal gland. Adrenal is on top of the, and the adrenal gland has got two layers, the cortex on the outside and the medulla in the middle. The medulla produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. and we'll talk about those in the second part. All right? Okay. Everybody knows the reproductive glands here that are involved in the, what are those ones? Testes, and then of course the ovaries for the female. All right? On the thyroid, there's this gland here, that's on the back, because the thyroid kind of wraps around the trachea and kind of doesn't touch at the back, but it sort of goes to the back there. And at the back, there will be these 4 dots. Does anybody know what this gland is? The parathyroid gland. It's all the time. Okay, and this releases parathyroid hormone, which is related to iron. Which iron is it? Calcium in bone. So parathyroid hormone causes the breakdown of bone. Okay. So remember on the beginning I showed you iron balance. So PTH is one of those hormones. Okay. When I ask you about the functions of the endocrine system in the exam, don't just say iron balance and put a period. Okay. Say iron balance, and then you start to talk about like parathyroid hormone causes the breakdown of bone and it increases blood calcium. All right. If you say the endocrine system is involved in the immune system, then you say the thymus produces thymopoietin and thymosins and so forth. The main hormone is thymosin. That comes from the thymus. All right, and that causes the maturation of T cells. You know, T cells are involved in immunity, right? T cells. Okay, you talk about that. Metabolism, you can talk about cortisol and how it, you know, by the end of it, we will have gone through all the hormones and we'll be talking about them, about those functions we listed. So you will then be able to give an example for each of those functions by the time we're done with the endocrine system too, right? All right, so those are them in diagram form. We can actually see them better here, okay? All the same. This is at the back, okay? It's not in the front. It goes to the back, the parathyroid gland. Okay, and the thyroid produces calcitonin, okay, which is also involved in calcium metabolism, right? Just by the name of it, all right? But this one, if you drink a bunch of milk and you've got calcium in your blood, you release calcitonin, so that calcitonin is deposited into blood, all right? And if you're lacking calcium, you release parathyroid hormone from the parathyroid gland, and then it will activate cells that break down bone, then you have more calcium in your blood. All right? Okay, this is what I said that we're going to do. Compare these two systems. All right? So, if we compare the organs, we know the organs of the nervous system would be the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves, right? And these ones, all the glands we just talked about. Those are involved in the pancreas, the kidneys, the adrenal glands, all those. All right? In the exam, if I ask you, can you compare the endocrine and the nervous system, then you will talk about one characteristic and say, okay, the endocrine system has these glands, then you mention the pancreas, kidney, all sorts of things, right? Pineal gland, whatnot. And then you say the nervous system only has the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves, right? Okay? And then the cells, we just did all those cells of the nervous system, right? Those glial cells, the astrocytes and so forth, the ependymal cells. So they've got neurons, which are excitable, so, and then the glial cells, which support, all right? And then cells that release the hormone, cells of all those glands we just talked about. Like for instance, the cells that release insulin, those islets of Langerhans, those beta cells release insulin. Okay, and then you got the alpha cells in those islets of Langerhans that release glucagon in the pancreas. Okay, so those are the cells. And the target cells for the nervous system, we said there is a functional connection, right? So whatever neuron synapses with another neuron, that's how it affects that cell. So it's the synapses, or if it's a muscle cell or a gland, okay? So the nervous system will influence the other cells that it forms synapses with, which we said are functional connections. There's not like a physical connection. Okay. Whereas the hormones, on the other hand, because they are released system-wide, only cells with the receptors for that hormone will be influenced, because it's going to be throughout the body system. Okay. So that's how specific it is. It's just like the lock and key. So I want you to compare all those cells. Like I said, the cell-to-cell communication as well. We talked about how endo means within, inside. You secrete inside, and then the hormones go into the interstitial fluid, and then they will, diffuse into blood. Then it is the blood that carries it. All right. In the nervous system, we said the neuron has an axon, a long axon. Remember. So the axon is one that propagates the action potential to go through, and then the terminals will have the synapses, and that's how that happens. Okay, so when you answer this question, you kind of just visualize the systems, just knowing that the endocrine system will release into the blood. So the only way you can segregate that hormone is to have receptors for that particular hormone in the cells you want to affect. Whereas the nervous system, you just have to have a synapse with the cell that you want to affect. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about this, how it's regulated. With the endocrine system, the stimulus or the influence depends on how much hormone you produce. So if you produce a whole bunch of hormone, that's going to be a bigger effect, right? If you produce, and that is amplitude. Amplitude just means size. Okay? So if you produce little hormone, then the effect is less. Okay? With the nervous system, we said action potentials are all or none, right? Mm-hmm. And they will go to the same, depolarization. If a certain organ or tissue will go to plus 30, all the, nervous system, action potentials for that organ will just go to plus 30. So how then do you tell the difference between stimuli? Well, for the nervous system, it is frequency. So that's the number of action potentials you fire per unit time. So if you fire like 10 action potentials in 1 second, that's a strong signal. And then if you fire 2 action potentials in 1 second, that's a weak signal. Okay? So the nervous system is frequency modulated, whereas the endocrine system is amplitude modulated. Amplitude is the size, the concentration of the hormone. Okay? Speed of response with the endocrine system, especially when we talk about the steroid hormones, which are fat soluble, that influence protein synthesis. Yeah, they are slower because then you've got to make the protein, and then the protein will do the effect of the hormone. They're much slower. Whereas the nervous system, how fast is the nervous system? Like lightning fast. Like right now I'm walking, if I'm barefooted and I step on a tack, I'll feel it almost instantaneously. That's like fast. And that's because of the myelin sheath, right? Remember the myelin sheath speeds up the transmission so that it goes fast. So the nervous system lasts for seconds, milliseconds to seconds. Whereas this can last for hours, the endocrine system. Because as long as the blood contains that hormone, it will continue to have the effect. And then later on, I'll talk a little bit about how some hormones are bound by proteins, especially the ones that are not soluble in water, right? Like steroid hormones, or those lipid-based hormones, they get bound to a protein so that they kind of stay resident in blood for a long time. And then when you have less hormone, then it becomes unbound, and then it does its action. So it can last for hours to days. It's prolonged. Okay? And then, of course, hormones, they've got more widespread effects, right? Because it's released into the systemic circulation. It's systemic, it goes everywhere. So it has a wide-reaching effect. But the nervous system is more specific, right? Because only the cell that synapses with that neuron is going to be affected. Okay? And a neuron will only synapse with a particular cell type and so forth. Okay? So if I ask about this, which is a good question because it kind of gives you the overall view of the endocrine system and the nervous system, right? So this is what I was talking about earlier on about amplitude modulation and frequency modulation, right? Okay, you see the amplitude, just like we do in the electrophysiology experiments, right? We say the area under the curve, which is called the absolute integral, is the magnitude of that, action potential if you're measuring the muscles or whatever. Okay, so you can see that's the concentration of the hormone. So that's a weak signal compared to this one. You see, that's a much stronger signal. So endocrine system is amplitude modulated, right? Whereas the nervous system is frequency modulated. So like here, you only have 4 APs, right? Action potential. Okay, and then here you've got many, and then here you got more. Okay, so this would be a stronger signal. You see what I'm saying? So the nervous system is frequency modulated. All right, and we've talked about it a little bit. The response of to the endocrine system is much slower and more prolonged than the nervous system, right? For obvious reasons, because the nervous system is quick, it's right on the spot. You need that information fast, and you act upon it fast as well. So it's only lasts for a few seconds, all right? So you gotta know how these systems are modulated, right? All right, so hormones, of course, are chemicals. So they could be either be proteins. Proteins are proteins soluble in water or insoluble. What are proteins from what we did before? Remember when we did all those organic compounds? Proteins, are they soluble in water or insoluble? Proteins? Soluble. You remember proteins have got that carboxyl group, which is charged. Okay? So it's kind of like this. And then it's kind of like a plus here. And then C, and then you have the CO. So this is negative charge. In fact, they appear as sweeter ions. So they are charged. So they are polar. So they will be soluble in water, right? And then you have the H, and then the other group here will be the amino acid. So the proteins are polar, okay? So polar proteins, I'm going to sort of preempt this information. You know the qualities of the plasma membrane, right? What is it? Is it lipid or or non-lipid? The bipod membrane. It's a lipid membrane, right? And so if you have a protein hormone, do those guys mix? So that's where you will be needing receptors that span the cell, so that the protein will come from the outside as the hormone and will attach to a membrane receptor that spans the width of the membrane, so that it will influence what happens inside the cell like that. So we talk about those two kinds of receptors. And then steroids and lipids and so forth, like testosterone in them, those are lipid soluble, right? So they like the plasma membrane. So those ones go through, and they will attach to either a cytoplasmic receptor or a nuclear receptor. It even goes through. Okay? And they will cause photosynthesis, and I'll talk about that. All right? They are secreted, of course, by these cells. All right? That are from the pancreas or thyroid and so forth. And they diffuse into blood from the interstitial cells. All right? And then they will, of course, influence specific organs that have receptors for that. All right? So it's based on what we talked about. So you can imagine the leg phase for the endocrine system is going to be much longer, especially for steroid hormones that cause protein synthesis, because the hormone has got to get through the membrane, go through the cytoplasm, get into the nucleus, and then on the DNA it will attach to things called hormone response elements. All right? Then it will transcribe the DNA, you form messenger RNA, it comes out of there, the nucleus, right? And then it goes into the cytoplasm, and then you have, the amino acids come, and then you do the translation, which is formation of a protein. By the time you form this long protein, that's a long lag phase, you know what I'm saying, right? Whereas for the endocrine system, it just takes the amount of time it takes to shoot the action potential to that synapse. All right, so they can go for hours, especially if you have to create a protein. On the average, protein hormones are much faster, okay, because they just switch on certain enzyme, and I'll show you right now how that happens with the G proteins and so forth. Okay, but on average, the steroid hormones are the ones that have a much longer lag phase because they do what? They have to produce a protein. Okay, and they tend to have prolonged effects in the endocrine system because the hormone is widespread, and as long as it's there, and later on we'll talk about how hormones are gotten rid of by the body, right? We can get rid of them through the urine, or through the liver as well, so through the kidneys and through the liver, and then the liver through bile will take it to the small intestine, and then it's gotten rid of. So these are the two major groups of hormones based on the functional properties of that molecule. Proteins are soluble in water, so they will not mix with the lipid bilayer. All right? So they could be polypeptides, amines, and so forth, amino acids, okay, those hormones, glycoproteins, and I'll show you a whole list of them that are protein hormones: epinephrine, norepinephrine, all those are protein hormones. And those tend to have faster effects. Like when you're doing fight-flight situation, you don't want to be waiting hours to make a protein for you to respond. You want to go quick. So most of the protein hormones are, involved in the faster response for the endocrine system, even though it's a little slower than the nervous system, but it's a little faster. Okay, these lipid group ones, these are the ones that are steroids and fatty acids, and these are the ones that will produce. These are the ones that go into the nucleus to cause transcription and then translation. So you form a protein here, and by the time you form a protein, that's like a long time, And then the effect of this protein, whatever that protein does, it could be an enzyme that does something. Then that's the effect of that hormone. Okay. So I want you to know the overall two groups: the protein, hormones that are soluble in water, and therefore will attach to a receptor on the outside of the cell, and then these lipid soluble ones, okay? So this is receptor on cell membrane, okay? And then this is a cytoplasmic or nuclear receptor. Sometimes it will go straight into the nucleus right there, okay? And this is one that causes protein synthesis. Nuclear meaning the nucleus. Okay? So be able to talk about these two groups, proteins, and give me the functions and the qualities of it, and the speed of response for protein hormones versus the lipid hormones, which are mostly steroids. Like testosterone is a steroid. Estrogen is a steroid. All right? Okay, so for the most part, of course, this is going to be controlled by negative feedback. Why? So when you produce a certain hormone, once you have enough of it, that hormone will go back to the source and cause it to shut down. So that's negative feedback, right? Remember when we talked about homeostasis, what did we say about homeostasis? We said it's mostly negative feedback mechanisms that influence homeostasis. Okay, what's the other control mechanism for homeostasis? Negative, then positive. What does positive do? Yeah, and level contractions keep going and going and going, right? Okay, so that increases the initial change. So positive makes the initial change worse and worse and worse. Okay, so that's why mostly negative feedback mechanisms are involved here. And all the systems are involved in maintaining homeostasis, which is kind of relatively constant internal environment, right? And you can do it by the hormones in this endocrine system. All right? Okay. So the hormone, of course, changes, secretion levels based on, the amount that is in the blood, in the interstitial, in the extracellular fluid. All right. So what happens is that it can be controlled by a substance, a non-hormonal substance, like say insulin is controlled by something else, like a non-hormonal substance like glucose. So the level of glucose in the blood affects the release of insulin. All right. So that's a non-hormonal substance, right? Like glucose influences insulin release if you have high glucose levels. If you have low glucose levels, you release glucagon. All right? And then, the nervous system can stimulate the release of hormones. Remember when I was talking about how the hypothalamus is neural control of the pituitary? Okay? And then it can cause the pituitary to release hormones by sending action potentials. Or, like I was saying, the hormone will release, the hypothalamus can release growth hormone, releasing hormone, that doesn't engage, right? Growth hormone releasing hormone, which causes the release of growth hormone. See what I'm saying? So those are the ways that the hormone release is controlled. 3 ways. So in the exam, if I ask what are the 3 ways that hormone release is controlled, then you can say it can be controlled by a non-hormonal substance, like glucose levels affect insulin and glucagon levels, right? Or you can say the nervous system can control that, just like the nervous system and the hypothalamus sends action potentials to the pituitary gland so that it releases, okay? Or it can inflate another gland that is outside of the head to release, say, the adrenal gland, for instance. The nervous system can send an action potential there, and then it will cause the adrenal gland to produce epinephrine. Okay? In a flight situation. That happens. Or it can release a hormone, like a growth hormone releasing hormone, or thyroid stimulating hormone releasing hormone, okay, to cause the release of that hormone. So those 3 ways, be able to tell me how hormones in the endocrine system are regulated. Okay, these are the 3 mechanisms that regulate hormone secretion. Okay, so be able to tell me that. All right, so this is a little cartoon here that shows
hormonal communication generally begins with a part of the neuroendocrine system receiving sensory information and reacting by issuing a command to the body in the form of a hormone. In this example, dehydration is detected by osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, which then directs or stimulates the posterior pituitary gland to release antidiuretic hormone, ADH. The next step is to transport the hormone molecules to target cells. This is typically done via the bloodstream. Here, ADH is transported through the bloodstream to the kidneys and blood vessels. When hormone molecules reach target cells, they will bind to matching receptors on those cells, and the hormone receptor complexes will trigger changes in the target cells. This causes the kidneys to reduce the urine volume output, thereby increasing water retention and countering dehydration. In blood vessels, vasoconstriction is increased, leading to higher blood pressure and thus countering the blood pressure drop caused by dehydration.
Okay, so did you see how the posterior pituitary is linked by those neurons? That's the nervous control, right? Okay, and then the anterior pituitary that's the one that's affected by hormones, like growth hormone releasing hormone. See what I'm saying? It just goes into blood and then comes back and influences the anterior pituitary. Okay, so that's a good example of how the hormones are regulated here by the nervous system and also by other hormones. So those are the 2 mechanisms that we talked about. Okay, so of course, transport and secretion, excretion. The transport, of course, occurs in the blood. All right, and if it's a protein hormone, it's gonna like water environment because blood is mostly water, right? Plasma is all water, so it just travels in the blood. Okay, we get a problem when we have a lipid hormone or steroid hormone. Steroid hormones are lipids, so they're not soluble in water. So those ones are the ones that are bound to a protein. Okay, so the steroid hormone or those lipid hormones are bound to a protein that makes it soluble in the blood, so that it can kind of mix with the water environment in the blood. All right. So that's why protein hormones, because they're not bound and they're easily transportable in the blood, they have faster effects than the steroid hormones. Besides that, they have to be bound to a protein. So when you want it to act, you have to unbind it from the protein that is bound. Okay, then it will diffuse into the membrane. Not only that, then it has to cause the formation of another protein. Okay, which takes time. By the time you transcribe and translate, that's time. So, so the rapid onset is for the protein hormones. Okay, and such as epinephrine and norepinephrine makes sense, right? Because norepinephrine and epinephrine, same thing as adrenaline and noradrenaline. Okay, for fight flight. Those are situations where you need fast action. Okay, so those are protein hormones, and those are soluble in water, and they can quickly move in blood. Okay, and they're quickly broken down by enzymes too. So the effect is shorter and faster. You can just use an enzyme because it's a protein, you can break it down. Okay? But steroid hormones are the ones that last in there forever in the blood, and they are gotten rid of via urine in the kidneys or via the digestive system, through the liver. So they're not quickly removed from blood. Because of that, all right, they produce that prolonged effect. Okay, one, they have to be bound to a protein to make them resident in blood, because blood is an aqueous environment, all right. And as long as the protein that is produced is present, then the effect will be felt for longer. Even after the hormone has been released and stopped, you know what I'm saying? Even after the hormone is no longer being released, its effect can still be felt. Okay, until you get rid of the proteins that was created by that hormone. Okay, so those are the two ways I talked about how you get rid of hormones from the blood. The first way is when they come out of blood and go into the cells. That's one way of removing it, right? The actual concentration of the hormone in the blood, it becomes lower when it goes to its site where it acts, and it goes into that cell, so the concentration goes down. Another way is that the hormone can be released in the urine by the kidneys. Okay, and then that's the second way. The third way is that it can be released in the digestive system of the liver, because the liver connected to the small intestine by some ducts coming from the gallbladder. Okay, so it goes with the bile. So when the bile is being secreted into the into the duodenum, then the hormones will be in it too, and then they will be excreted through the digestive system. Okay, so three ways that you can reduce the concentration of your hormone in blood, right? Those are things I'll ask in the exam about this, okay? All right, so pretty much basically know these two major groups, the protein and the soluble hormone, the lipid soluble hormones, all right? Because they influence the activity of the hormones and the speed of the activity, all right? So like we've said, target cells for hormones will have a receptor for it, okay? Because the hormones are spread throughout blood. So then the only way you can discriminate is to have, you see how you have this kind of receptor, this kind of ligand or hormone, and how it doesn't fit there. So only a specific ligand or a specific hormone will fit in there, and that's the only one that will influence it. All right. So that's the specificity. All right. So cells will respond to to hormones for which they have a receptor. Okay. So here we're going to talk about the classes of receptors. All right. So we got membrane-bound receptors, like I said. This will be for the protein-soluble hormones. All right. And these protein-soluble hormones can affect some enzyme inside of the cell. Okay? You see, it will activate something inside here, and the hormone stays outside because it can't go through. Okay? So those hormones that are, because of the solubility qualities, if they are soluble in water, they can't go through the membrane, they will attach to a receptor on the cell membrane. Or sometimes it could be size. Just sheer size is just too large to squeeze through the lipid bilayer. In that case, it will still be have to attach on the outside. Okay? So those are the membrane-bound, receptors. Okay, they could be there's like two kinds of these membrane-bound receptors, of these receptors for protein hormones. The first one is like ionotropic. It will influence the release of an ion, right? So it will either cause, like the one we talked about, like the sodium ligand gated channels on neuromuscular junctions. Sometimes there's a similar setup where instead of having acetylcholine, you have a hormone that attaches to that ligand gated ion channel, and then that ion channel opens when the hormone attaches, just similarly to how acetylcholine attaches to those sodium ligand gated channels, right? So those will be the ionotropic ones. And instead of having the acetylcholine, you have the hormone attaching, right? And then it causes, and then metabotropic. Now these ones will activate usually G proteins, and they can activate a G protein is inside, and I'll show you the mechanism in a little bit. It will attach to a G protein here, and then after this enzyme is activated, and then the G protein will cause an effect, like maybe stimulate an enzyme inside of the cell, and I'll give you examples in a little bit. Okay. So metabotropic, it will influence metabolism things. Okay, and then the ionotropic will influence ions. Okay, of those membrane-bound receptors. All right, and then intracellular receptors. This will be for the steroid hormones, lipid-soluble hormones, and I said they could either attach to a cytoplasmic receptor, right? So that the hormone receptor complex will go into the nucleus to cause protein synthesis, or the hormone will directly go straight into the nucleus and attach to a nuclear receptor. All right? Okay. Okay. So then there's that for the intracellular receptors. These are for the lipid-soluble hormones, and those ones are the protein-soluble hormones, or simply hormones that are too large to go through the cell membrane. All right, and there's another little.
Aldosterone is a lipid-soluble hormone that can easily diffuse through the plasma membrane. Inside the cell, aldosterone binds with an aldosterone receptor molecule in the cytoplasm. The aldosterone receptor complex moves into the nucleus and binds to DNA. The binding of the aldosterone receptor complex to DNA stimulates the synthesis of messenger RNA, which codes for specific proteins. The messenger RNA moves from the nucleus into the cytoplasm and binds to ribosomes, where it directs the synthesis of specific proteins. These proteins produce the response of the cell to aldosterone.
So aldosterone is also involved in the kidneys, in terms of sodium release. So it will cause water retention or more water retention. And just like ADH also is concerned with loss of water this time. Okay, aldosterone will affect the ions, whereas ADH will affect the water itself. Okay, you get more water. But okay, so that's how you have a lipid soluble, and this one attached to a cytoplasmic receptor. There's a few that will go into the nucleus and attach to a nuclear receptor. Okay, so these are just the basic types we talked about. We've got the hormone membrane-bound receptors. Okay, you get the ones that stimulate the G proteins. So you have more of the metabotropic here on this side, and then you know, you can have ion channels as well in the ionotropic. Because some of these G proteins, when they're activated, it will go and activate an ion channel. And then, like the calmodulin one, the calcium one. And I'll show you an example of that. And then these ones, on this side, will stimulate or will cause the production or synthesis of a new protein. All right? And the effect of that protein will be the effect of that hormone. And here, maybe it will change the membrane potential. When a certain ion moves in, it could depolarize if sodium channels open. It could, you know, hyperpolarize if chloride channels open, and so forth. So a cell could be inhibited or could be stimulated by those receptors, right? So these are the G protein receptors, you know, that will attach to a protein or a transmembrane protein. And then inside of the cell, there will be a 3 subunit protein that is a beta, alpha, and gamma subunits, okay? So when the transmembrane receptor, the receptor that goes through the membrane is activated, and then it will activate those 3 subunits, okay? Those 3 subunits, you know, before activation of the big enzyme, this alpha is attached to GDP, guanine diphosphate, okay? That's why they're called G proteins, because of the guanine that these alpha subunits are attached to. Okay, so in an inactive form, the alpha subunit is attached to GDP. When the transmembrane protein is attached to the receptor, then you've got the alpha, beta, and the gamma subunits. Then the GDP is replaced with GTP, and then this part, the alpha subunit attached to GTP, once it's activated, it will detach from the other 2 units. And I'll show you an example like that. Okay? And then when the alpha subunit attached to GTP, that is dissociated from the other 2, that's the one that will go and attach to an ion channel or cause, you know, an enzyme to be activated. Could be MEP kinases, and I'll show you different mechanisms here. Okay? So that's what this gene is talking about. Okay. Once it's activated, it will dissociate from these 2, and it's now attached to GTP, guanine triphosphate. It's just like adenosine diphosphate, adenosine triphosphate. Same thing. Instead of having adenine, you have guanine. Okay, so that's what they call G proteins. Okay. So like I was talking about earlier on, you know, you have these protein hormones, all these glucagon, calcitonin, you know, epinephrine, norepinephrine, all those thyroid hormones, all those are protein soluble hormones that will affect these water soluble hormones that affect these G proteins. Okay? So you have many examples, even oxytocin, that is involved in contraction of the smooth muscle of the uterus, it activates G protein, is water soluble. So this is the mechanism of action for activating G proteins, okay, via a water soluble hormone. Okay, so when the hormone is not attached to the receptor, the transmembrane receptor, what do you have? You've got your gamma, beta, and alpha subunits all attached, but attached to GDP. Okay? So that's the start right there. Then a hormone will attach on the transmembrane protein. Then this becomes activated, or all activated, boom, boom. And then it will want this guy to attach, the 3 subunits, the G protein. Okay? So the G protein will attach here, and then it will cause the attachment of GTP, and so this will be substituted in the second part. You substitute the GTP for GTP, right? And then once that happens, then it will dissociate from the hormone receptor complex, okay? And then after that, the alpha subunit will dissociate from the gamma and the beta subunits. The alpha subunit is one that's attached to the GTP. Okay, now it's all activated and stuff like that. So that's the third step. And then this activated alpha subunit attached to GTP can excite, say, opening of a protein channel, an ion channel, for instance, and that's one of the examples I'll show you first. Or it can stimulate an enzyme or MAP kinase or all these enzymes that will phosphorylate other proteins. Okay, so it can activate an enzyme or it can open an ion channel. Okay, and then of course, you know, when the hormone dissociates, okay, then the GTP is replaced with the GTP, okay, and then you release the inorganic phosphate, okay, from the GTP, and then once this is attached to GTP, it rebinds to the beta and gamma subunits, and then it waits, okay. So whenever it stimulates a protein channel, you have the first three steps, an ion channel, so these are the only steps that will happen, okay. This happens when you're deactivating the hormone, okay? So you leave that part and then you proceed from here, okay? So, anyway, okay, I'll play this.
The membrane-bound receptor has a receptor site for a small molecule called a ligand exposed on the outside of the cell. The portion of the receptor on the inside of the cell can bind to the G protein, which has a guanosine diphosphate attached to its alpha subunit. When the ligand binds to the receptor site on the outside of the cell membrane, the G protein changes conformation, and guanosine triphosphate replaces the guanosine diphosphate on the alpha subunit of the G protein. The activated alpha subunit then separates from the beta and gamma subunits. This step can be repeated as long as the ligand remains bound to the receptor. When the ligand separates from the receptor site, additional G proteins are no longer activated. Inactivation of the alpha subunit occurs when its own phosphorylase activity removes a phosphate from the guanosine triphosphate, leaving guanosine diphosphate bound to the subunit. The G protein subunits then recombine and attach to the receptor in the cell membrane.
Yeah, wait for the next. So that's how it is stimulated. So sometimes if you just want to look at this mechanism, instead of reading through it, when you see something, you remember it more. You know what I'm saying? So I'll post these on there, my heritage, you can see them instead of just always reading it. Okay, so we have done those three things, those three steps. So if I was to talk about, tell me how, a G protein can stimulate ion channel, then you talk about that. Okay, you talk about the first three steps of activating the G protein, where you get the receptor binding, the alpha, beta, gamma subunits attached to the receptor, and then GTP is replaced with GTP. Then they will dissociate from the hormone receptor L complex. Then the alpha subunit will dissociate from the gamma and beta subunits. It is the alpha subunit attached to GTP that will go and attach to the protein, whatever you want to excite, or an enzyme that you want to activate. Okay, so the first step is that the GTP bounds to the alpha subunit, then goes and attaches to an ion channel. Okay, in this case it's a calcium channel. So this will be the ionotropic part of things, right? And then it will cause it to open. Once that alpha subunit attached to GTP, will cause it to open, all right? And then once it opens, the calcium gets in to the cell, right? And then it attaches to calmodulin. Okay, this is what happens in smooth muscles when they're contracting. because they have calmodulin instead of the troponin. Remember, the troponin attaches to the calcium in skeletal muscle. In smooth muscle, it is the calmodulin that does that and causes the muscle to contract. Smooth muscle, all right? So then it's now activated, and then the smooth muscle contracts. Okay, so if I ask about how G proteins activate ion channels, you talk about the first 3 steps, and then those last 2 steps, you get 5 points, right? Okay, you talk about these 2 points here, and then calcium diffuses attaches to calmodulin. So that's how G proteins activate ion channel. Okay, now we're going to show you another scenario where the G protein is activating an enzyme. Okay, so the same deal. I'm not going to go through with this because it's the same deal as the other one, but you can always watch it later on because then this goes further and opens this calcium channel, just like I just showed in there. So it will do those usual first 3 steps, then the last 2 steps will open the channel. So I'm going to skip this one, okay, but you can always watch it again, but it's the same as the one I just showed you. All right, so you got the water-soluble hormone that will attach up there, and then we'll do those 3 steps, right? The GDP gets replaced with GTP, all right? And then the alpha subunit splits from the gamma and beta subunits, all right? And then the activated alpha subunit attached to GTP will cause this activation of this enzyme, okay? And this enzyme is on the inside of the cell, all right? So once this enzyme is activated, that enzyme is called adenylate cyclase, okay? Because what does it do? It takes ATP and converts it into cyclic AMP, okay? And then it will release 2 inorganic phosphates right here. Where did I put my pen? Okay? So when that happens, then you have this cyclic AMP will be like a second messenger. Cyclic AMP will go and stimulate protein kinases. Protein kinases will phosphorylate certain proteins, and when those proteins are phosphorylated, they become active. Okay? So it will activate certain enzymes by phosphorylating them because you have activated a protein kinase. All right? And then, if you want to get rid of the second messenger to stop the activity of this hormone, you have phosphodiesterase. It's an enzyme that will break down cyclic AMP to just regular adenosine monophosphate. Okay? The cyclic one is one that's active. So it will break it down, right? And then, so that's how you deactivate that. Okay? So, sometimes I might ask about how this has more steps, right? How you activate an enzyme or protein kinase by the G proteins, right? Okay, so then you talk about that. All right. So these are classes of receptors. Okay, a hormone binds to a membrane-bound one and directly activated intracellular enzyme, just like with the adenylate cyclase. All right. And those enzymes can synthesize an intracellular protein, phosphorylate it, and so forth. Okay? By adding a phosphate, and then it activates that, just like we talked about here. All right? And that's it, really. Okay? So, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Again, we're going for the last time to 417 or whatever over there. Okay? So, this will be the last time we'll go there. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.